Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming back to the Love and Betrayal channel. Today, I have a new and quite interesting story to share with you. The day he disappeared. The last time I saw my son, he was chasing a red balloon down the sidewalk. It was a Tuesday, ordinary, sunny, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking the world is safe. Liam was 7. He had just lost his first tooth. He smiled with a gap in the middle, like it was something he was proud of, like it made him braver. We had just left the grocery store. He begged to hold the balloon a vendor gave him outside. I tied it to his wrist, double knot. He laughed. "It's flying, Mommy, look." And then it slipped. He ran after it. Just a few steps ahead, I called his name. He looked back at me smiling, then turned the corner and vanished. I sprinted after him. 1 second, 2. But when I turned the same corner, he was gone. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe he hid. Kids do that. I shouted his name, checked behind trash bins, behind the ice cream truck, under the wooden bench. Nothing. I ran back to the store, told the cashier, told the manager, called the police. They said stay calm. They said children wander. They said we'll find him. But I already knew. Something was wrong. The search began immediately. Amber Alert flyers, phone calls. I walked the streets until my feet bled, knocked on every door within 3 miles. No one had seen him, no camera had caught him, no trace. The red balloon was found 2 blocks away, caught in a tree. But Liam? Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. My husband Alex and I began to unravel. He closed himself off, stared at the wall for hours, spoke in monosyllables. I screamed more, broke dishes, paced the hallway like Liam might magically reappear if I moved fast enough. People stopped calling, news crews packed up. We became that house, the one with the missing child and a mother who looked more ghost than woman. And then 6 weeks later, it happened. The first time I saw him, not Liam, the dog. It was raining, hard, the kind of rain that feels like it's trying to wash your memories away. I was sitting on the porch, numb. No umbrella, no jacket. Just silence. And then, through the mist, a shape. At first, I thought I imagined him. Medium-sized, matted fur, golden brown. One ear half flopped, eyes dark, steady, almost human. He stood at the edge of my yard, watching me. I didn't move. Neither did he. Finally, I whispered, "You lost too?" He tilted his head, then turned, walked down the street, slow, deliberate, then paused, looked back at me, like he was asking me to follow. I didn't. I was too tired, too scared of hoping. But the next day, he came back. Same spot, same stare. And again, he turned, walked a few steps, paused, waited. That night, I told Alex, "There's a dog that keeps coming back." He barely responded, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would a stray come back to the same house every day, same time? Why always pause like he wanted something? On the 3rd day, I followed him. Just a block. He didn't run. Damn bark. He just walked into the woods behind the school, then stopped, looked at me, then sat, still, like he was waiting for something. "Is this where he is?" I asked, voice trembling. The dog didn't move, didn't answer. But in my chest, something shifted. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt the smallest flicker of something I didn't dare name. Hope. I never liked the woods behind the school. They were too dense, too quiet, like they had secrets in the soil. Kids called it the whispering trees. Parents warned about ticks and coyotes. But mostly it was just forgotten land. No one ever went in. At least not unless they had a reason. On the 3rd day, when the dog, this strange, silent creature, turned into those woods and sat beneath the canopy of twisted limbs, something inside me stirred. I should have turned around, gone home, told myself it was coincidence. But instead, I stepped forward. Just 1 foot at first. He watched me. Didn't move, didn't wag. Just waited. I took another step, and another, until the damp ground was beneath my shoes and the streetlight behind me faded into shadows. Branches creaked in the wind, leaves crunched softly. He stood then, started walking again. No leash, no command, just a silent agreement between us. We moved deeper into the woods. He never looked back, but he never got too far ahead either. Like he knew I was afraid and that he had to go slow. 20 steps, then a pause. He'd wait, then continue. I don't know how long we walked. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Time is a strange thing when you're halfway between despair and faith. Then he stopped. A small clearing, moss-covered rocks, a tree with a split down the center like lightning had once kissed its bark. He sniffed the ground, walked in a circle, then sat. Still, eyes locked on me. "What is this place?" I whispered. No answer but cry of a horse. But the air felt different here, thicker, like it held something unspoken. I knelt. The soil was disturbed, soft, uneven. A patch of dry leaves had been piled clumsily over something. I brushed them aside with trembling fingers and gasped. A shoe, small, worn, with a faded cartoon rocket drawn in black ink on the side. Liam's shoe. My knees gave out. I sat in the dirt, clutching it like it was the last breath of my son. Tears burst forth, wild and shaken. "Liam," I sobbed. "Liam." The dog walked over, gently placed his head on my lap. Not wagging, not licking, just being. After I calmed enough to breathe, I examined the area. There were more signs. A juice box flattened and dirty. A small green marble. A torn piece of a map, hand-drawn in crayon. It was Liam's. I recognized the son he always drew with sunglasses and a crooked smile. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. Called 911. "I found something," I whispered. "Please, send someone." The officers arrived 20 minutes later. They weren't unkind, but they didn't look hopeful. I could see it in their eyes, the subtle strain of too many false leads. Until I showed them the shoe. Then everything changed. They marked the area, photographed the clearing, collected the items carefully, asked me to describe how I found it. When I told them about the dog, they blinked. "A stray led you here?" I nodded. "He's been coming to my house for 3 days, always pausing, like he wanted me to follow." The officer crouched beside the dog. "You found this, buddy?" Toast didn't respond. Didn't move, just looked back at me. Like I was the only one who understood the language he spoke. The search resumed the next morning. Not in the park, not in parking lots or doorsteps. In the woods. The same woods we'd never checked. 'Cause why would a child go there? But now, we had a reason. And the dog, he came back. Again. And again, leading us deeper. He sniffed at broken twigs, waited by half-buried cans, scratched gently at piles of leaves. Always careful, always quiet. That night, the officer in charge called me aside. "You know what's strange?" he said. I shook my head. There were no other footprints out here, no adult tracks, just small ones. He paused. "And dog prints." Goosebumps ran up my arms. "You mean?" He nodded. "Wherever your son went, this dog may have been with him. Back home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch again, waiting, and just before dawn, he returned. Damp fur, tired eyes, but still there. He stepped onto the porch, rested his head against my knee, and for the first time since Liam disappeared, I whispered, "I believe you know where he is, and I'm not giving up until we find him." By the 4th day of searching the woods, the volunteers were beginning to lose steam. They had covered most of the terrain marked on the map. The clearing where we found Liam's shoe had been combed over again and again, but nothing new surfaced. No footprints, no pieces of clothing, no signs of shelter. Just trees, and more trees. Like nature had decided to swallow the rest. But Toast, yes, by now we had all started calling him that, wasn't done. Every morning he returned to our porch, sat patiently until I opened the door, then turned, tail swishing, heading straight for the woods like he had a schedule. The officers didn't know what to make of it. "He's acting like a search dog," one muttered. "But he hasn't had any training, has he?" I shook my head. "He's not trained," I said. "He's connected." On that day, the one I now think of as the beginning of everything, Toast didn't go to the clearing. Instead, he veered off the usual trail. Down a hill, over a shallow creek, then stopped in front of a patch of trees I would have walked past 1,000 times without noticing. He stared at them, then looked at me, then back to the trees. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. He took a step forward, then sniffed the base of one of the trees. A large oak, its trunk split wide at the base, forming a small hollow space like a natural alcove. Toast knows the leaves there. And then he barked. Loud, sharp, the first bark I had heard from him since the day he came to me. I froze. So did the officer beside me. Toast barked again, then started pawing at the ground near the roots. The officer knelt, brushed away the leaves. At first, nothing. But then, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, half soaked from dew, wrinkled but intact. He opened it carefully. On the inside, a drawing. Childlike. Messy lines, stick figures. One large tree, a square labeled hide. And 3 words in red crayon at the bottom. I went here. My heart dropped. I recognized the handwriting. It was Liam's. The officer looked up at me. "This is new. Oh, no one's searched here yet." He radioed the team. Within 10 minutes, a search party was gathered around the oak. They began spreading out, fanning into a wider radius around the hollow. Toast stayed with me, eyes alert, breathing heavy. Then he took off, not far, just a few yards ahead into a dense patch of brush. He barked again, this time 3 times in a row. Sharp, urgent. The officer chased after him. I followed, heart racing, lungs burning. Toast stopped in front of an old rusted drainage pipe, half buried under mud and vines, big enough for a child to crawl into. The officer crouched, shined a flashlight, then shouted, "Here, I've got something." I held my breath, praying, afraid to hope. But then he emerged, holding something in his gloved hands. A plastic toy dinosaur, green, tiny. Its tail was broken off. I collapsed to my knees. That dinosaur had been in Liam's backpack since kindergarten. I had tried to throw it out once. He cried for hours. He called it Tiny T. It was his. The team widened the search, this time focusing only on the surrounding half-mile. They found more clues. A juice pouch wrapper, another crayon, a small cloth blanket, the one with rocket ships. Every clue said the same thing. He had been here. He was alive long enough to draw, to play, to wait. But the forest was big, and time was running thin. Each night, Toast returned home with me. Each night I asked him, "Can you find him again?" He would press his head against my hand, close his eyes. And somehow I knew the answer was yes. Then one morning, everything changed. Toast didn't go to the woods. He ran, fast, focused, no pauses, no waiting. We followed officers, volunteers, myself, through a narrow path no one had marked, deeper than we'd ever been allowed to go before. And then he stopped, barked, scratched the ground, and waited. The air was still, too still. The lead officer approached, radioed the team to spread out, then knelt and examined the area. We were near a rock formation, one that seemed oddly unnatural, like it had shifted recently. Toast pawed again, and then we heard it, a noise. So faint we thought it was the wind at first, but Toast turned sharply, head lifted, then barked hard. The noise came again, this time clear. From beneath the rocks, a muffled voice, weak but real, a name. "Mom?" My body stopped working for a second, then exploded into movement. "I'm here!" I screamed. "Liam, D!" "Mommy, how you name the voice again?" "I'm stuck." The team rushed in. Uncovered rocks, moved carefully. And there, beneath a small, natural crevice they hadn't searched before, was Liam. Dirty, thin, tear-streaked, alive. I dropped beside him as they pulled him free, wrapped my arms around him like I would never let go again. He clung to me, crying. "I waited, Mommy. I kept waiting." Toast stood nearby, tail still, eyes shining. Ellie had once said dogs cry in silence. If that were true, Toast was weeping that day. So was I. Liam was safe. That should have been the end of the story. The police found him. He was alive, dehydrated, bruised, but whole. They ran tests, monitored his vitals, fed him warm soup, and let him sleep under soft hospital lights. But even as the world celebrated, something in his eyes told me there was more. On the second night in the hospital, when the nurses finally left and the machines beeped steadily like a lullaby, Liam reached for my hand. His fingers were cold. His voice was soft. "Mom." I leaned closer. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." He looked around, then whispered, "They don't believe me." I frowned. "Who doesn't?" "The people in the uniforms." "The officers?" He nodded. "They asked me where I was, but when I told them everything, they said I was confused." I sat up straighter. "What did you tell them?" Liam hesitated, then said it quietly. "I wasn't alone." My heart stopped. "Someone was with you?" He nodded again. "But not a person." He turned his head slowly and pointed to the foot of the bed, where Toast lay, curled in sleep. "Him?" I followed his gaze. Toast didn't move. But I suddenly felt like he had been listening all along. Liam took a breath. "He was there the whole time, Mommy. Not just once, not just at the end. Since the first night I got lost." I tried to hold in the tears. "You remember?" He nodded slowly. "After I chased the balloon," he said, "I tried to come back, but I went the wrong way. I ended up by the fence near the old school parking lot. It got dark really fast, and I got scared. I curled up under some leaves, and then I heard something moving. My body tensed. Liam squeezed my hand. But it wasn't bad, it was him. He described how Toast appeared from the trees, how he sat just far enough away not to scare him, how that night he lay beside Liam sharing body heat while the wind howled. "He kept me warm, Mom. I think I would have been really sick without him." Over the next 6 days, Liam said Toast would leave for a bit, then come back, sometimes with food, pieces of crust, a bit of meat, a napkin soaked in something that tasted like apples. I didn't know whether to cry or feel disbelief. "He fed you?" Liam nodded, like he knew I couldn't. "I talked to him, you know," he added shyly, "every night, like I used to talk to Daddy's picture when he worked late." I squeezed his hand harder. He listened, and when I cried, he'd lick my face. When I said I was scared, he'd lie really close. He never barked, never left me too long. He just stayed. The tears came freely now. Not from grief, from awe. "But what about the drawing we found?" I asked. Liam smiled that he helped with that too. I blinked. "Toast helped you draw?" He giggled. "No, silly, he scratched the tree until I noticed the hollow. That's where I left the map in case someone came." "And the dinosaur?" "I dropped it by accident." He sniffed it, then licked my face like he knew it was important. Liam's story was consistent, honest, but when I told the police, they offered polite smiles and cautious nods. "He's been through trauma," one said. "Children cope with imagination," said another. I stared at them furious, but I wasn't surprised, because sometimes people don't want to believe what doesn't fit into boxes. What they didn't understand, what I understood now, was that Toast didn't just find Liam. He saved him, he stayed with him, he protected him. That night I sat beside Toast under the hospital window. He was still awake, eyes half closed, ears twitching. I stroked his fur and whispered, "You were never astray, were you? You were waiting for us long before we knew it." He exhaled gently, pressed his head into my palm. 2 days later, Liam was discharged. As we left the hospital, hand in hand, Toast trotted beside us like we were just going home after a long vacation. Neighbors cried. Strangers clapped. But Toast didn't seem interested in any of it. His eyes were always on Liam. Always. Back home, Liam refused to sleep without him nearby. We moved Toast's new bed into his room, but he never used it. Instead, he climbed up gently beside Liam, curled into a crescent moon of fur, and watched the door until morning. One evening, I stood in the hallway watching them sleep, and I realized something. Toast had been more than a guide. He had been family, not just because he saved my son, but because he chose to stay. Even when no one believed, even when the world doubted, he stayed. It was 3 weeks after Liam came home. His cheeks had color again. He laughed in full belly giggles that echoed through the halls. He started drawing rocket ships and suns with sunglasses just like before. But the biggest change? He was never without Toast. Where Liam went, Toast followed. To the kitchen, to the backyard, even to the bathroom door where he'd sit patiently like a silent bodyguard. No leash, no commands. Just loyalty. A bond that didn't need words anymore. One Saturday, Alex suggested we get away for a day. Just us. Clear our heads, leave the house, touch normalcy for a little while. We chose the cabin upstate, quiet, surrounded by pine trees and nestled beside a lake. We packed sandwiches, snacks, Liam's sketchbook, and Toast, of course. He sat in the back seat, head resting beside Liam's thigh, eyes half closed but always aware. The cabin was peaceful. Birds sang, wind rustled through leaves. The lake shimmered like a silver mirror under the afternoon sun. Liam threw pebbles into the water, while Toast chased shadows. I sat on the deck, feeling for the first time like life might truly begin again. Later that evening, clouds began to gather, not the gentle, slow kind. The fast, dark kind that roll in without asking. Thunder grumbled in the distance. Alex went to check the car windows. Toast says. Toast sat up, ears alert. That's when I noticed. The silence. No birds. Yeah, birds. No wind. Just stillness, too still. Then a faint, strange sound. A creak like pressure against wood. Toast stood, growled, low and deep. A sound I had never heard from him before. Then he barked. Once, loud, urgent. "Mom?" Liam called from inside. "What's that?" Before I could answer, the beam above the porch cracked. The old pine tree beside the house had tilted during the last storm. Now, heavy winds rocked it hard, and it was falling. Directly toward the cabin. I screamed, grabbed Liam, but the porch was narrow. We didn't have time to get back through the door. Then Toast charged. "Push it, Liam, for side." And that Ian from the side, yes. Yeah, just in time. The tree slammed down with a deafening crash, splintering the railing, shattering half the deck. Dust, wood, leaves. When it settled, I looked up. Liam was crying, but safe, and Toast. He was there. A small cut above his eye, limping, but standing between Liam and the crushed remains of the porch. I rushed over, held Liam tight, then knelt by Toast. "Are you okay? Oh God, Toast, are you hurt?" He licked my hand, soft, reassuring, still watching Liam. The tree had missed the cabin by inches. Had we stood a second longer under that beam, I don't like to finish the thought. Alex came running from the other side. Eyes wide. "What happened?" He stared at the wreckage, then at Toast. And for the first time in weeks, he cried. He knelt down beside Toast, pressed his forehead gently against his fur. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for bringing him back, and for keeping him here." The power went out that night. We lit candles. The storm raged for hours. But inside, the three of us huddled together on a mattress in the living room, Toast curled up at Liam's feet, his body still tense, still alert, even in sleep. As if he knew the world wasn't done testing us, but he wasn't going anywhere. Back home, we took him to the vet. He needed a few stitches, some rest. But the doctor said something I couldn't shake. "You know, I've seen war dogs with less instinct than him." I asked quietly, "You think he's trained?" The vet paused. Maybe he's just meant for something." That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, everyone else asleep, Toast at my feet. I opened my journal and wrote, "He found my son. He stayed with him. He led us to him. And today, he saved him again." People say dogs are loyal, but Toast isn't just loyal. He's something more. A guardian, a protector, a quiet kind of miracle that walks on four legs and never asks for anything except to be near us. Later, I found Liam sleeping with his hand resting on Toast's back. He whispered in his sleep, "Don't go, please don't go." Toast didn't move, but I knew he never would. It was a quiet morning. Sunlight filtered gently through the kitchen window. Liam was at the table, drawing another rocket ship with Toast curled beside him. I was sipping coffee, watching them, feeling for the first time in years like this peace might last. And then came the knock. 3 taps and taps. Firm, unexpected. Toast's ears perked up. He stood immediately, but not with his usual calm. This time his tail didn't wag, his body stiffened, eyes alert. I felt it too. Something was off. I opened the door. A man stood there, mid-40s, military haircut, leather jacket, a presence that filled the doorway before he even spoke. He looked past me into the house, and when his eyes landed on Toast, they filled with something raw, recognition. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I think that dog might be mine." My chest tightened. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "Excuse me?" He pulled out his phone, showed me a photo. It was older, grainy, but it was him. Toast. Same face, same eyes, same one flopped ear. He was wearing a harness marked Canine Rescue Unit. "My name is Mark," the man said. "I served with him, overseas. His name was Timber. He went missing during a transport back home after an earthquake response mission." I swallowed hard. "You're saying he's a rescue dog?" Mark nodded. He was trained to locate missing people in disaster zones, tunnels, rubble. He saved 12 lives before he vanished. He looked me in the eye. "I've been looking for him ever since." I didn't know what to say. Toast Timber wasn't a pet. He had a life before us, a purpose, a story. And now, that story was knocking on my front door, asking for him back. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "He found us when my son went missing." Mark nodded slowly. "I believe that. He was always like that. He didn't just follow orders, he felt things, knew where to go." Inside, Toast paced by the window. He saw Mark, and for the first time, he didn't move, didn't bark, didn't wag, didn't run to the door. Just stood there, watching. Mark sighed in. "I know this is hard. I needed to know he was okay. I needed to see him." I looked down. "He's okay because of him. My son is alive." Mark smiled, but it was sad. He never forgot his mission. That's who he is. Then he looked down at his hands. "I thought I'd come here and take him home, but I think I was wrong." I stared. "What do you mean?" He looked toward the window, at Toast, at Liam, who now stood beside him, holding his ear gently like he always did. "They're bonded," Mark said. "That's not something you break." I opened the door fully. Mark stepped inside. Toast didn't growl, didn't wag. Just walked over, sat beside Liam. Like choosing. Mark knelt down slowly, held out his hand. "Hey, partner," he whispered. Toast sniffed it. then licked it once, gently, then turned back to Liam. Mark nodded, wiped his eyes. I lost my best friend. He said, but you found a guardian. He stood, looked at me, Pinier. I won't take him, he already chose. I was shaken. Are you sure? He smiled sadly. I think he was never mine to keep, just mine to learn from. Then he knelt beside Liam. You take good care of him, okay? Liam nodded. I promise. Before leaving, Mark left a photo and a note. To the family Toast found, thank you for giving him a second mission. He saved lives in war. Now he saves hearts. That may be his greatest work yet. That night, Liam asked me something. Mom, do you think Toast has been waiting for us all his life? I looked at Toast, curled up peacefully at Liam's feet. I think he's always known where he was needed most. After Mark left, something shifted in Toast. Not dramatically. He was still the same loyal shadow behind Liam's every step, still curled up by his feet when he sketched rockets, still sat at the door every time the school bus pulled up. But there was something in his gaze, a softness, and also something sharper. Like he wasn't just watching anymore. He was centered. It started at the park. One warm afternoon, I took Liam to play on the slides while I sat on a bench under a sycamore tree. Toast lay at my feet, head on his paws, eyes half closed. A little girl nearby was crying. Nothing loud, just that quiet, trembling kind of sob where you can tell her heart is breaking. I looked over, no one else seemed to notice, except Toast. He stood up slowly, walked over to her, sat a few feet away, and just looked at her. She stopped crying, wiped her eyes, reached out. He let her pet him, then licked her hand gently. Her mother came over, startled. Apologized. That is then the end. The little girl whispered, I feel better now. Toast walked back to us, calm as ever. I didn't say anything, but I felt it. That moment meant something. Then it happened again, at school pickup. A boy standing alone, arms crossed, scowling. Toast pulled at the leash, walked up, sat beside him. Didn't do anything, just was there. And within minutes, the boy was crouched beside him, talking softly into Toast's fur. The teacher approached me later. That boy doesn't talk to anyone, she said, but today he talked to your dog. Soon it became routine. Wherever we went, Toast found someone. Someone hurting, someone silent, someone the world didn't see. And he stayed with them. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, until they breathed easier, until they smiled again. One day I asked Liam, do you notice what he's doing? Liam didn't hesitate. He's finding people like me. That answer stuck with me, because Liam had changed too. He wasn't afraid of the woods anymore. He spoke in class. He made a new friend. And whenever someone looked at Toast like he was just a dog, Liam would proudly say, he's not just a dog, he found me. We were invited to speak at the school assembly. About hope, the principal said. Liam wanted to do it himself. I stood at the back of the auditorium, hand shaking, while my son stood on stage. He told the story his way, about getting lost, about the dark, about being scared. And then he said, I didn't know how to yell for help, but Toast heard me anyway. The room went quiet. Even the adults were blinking away tears. Afterward, kids lined up to pet Toast. One girl whispered, my dad left last week. I cried under the covers. Toast leaned against her, didn't move until she stopped shaking. Word spread. Soon we started getting letters, emails, requests. Would Toast visit a children's hospital? A therapy group? A nursing home? At first I was overwhelmed. But Toast, he simply waited by the door every morning like he already knew where we were going next. We didn't make it official. No vests, just us. And vest, no badges, just heart and a leash. He visited classrooms quietly, sat beside hospital beds, listened to stories from veterans who hadn't spoken in years. Always the same pattern. He sat, he listened, he stayed. One elderly woman whispered as she stroked his fur, my son had a dog like this. He used to sit beside me when I cried too. She closed her eyes. I haven't cried in 20 years until now, and then smiled. I realized something that day. Toast had chosen his next mission. Not given, not assigned. Chosen to seek out the broken parts of people and sit with them until they remembered they weren't alone. One night, Liam asked, do you think Toast will ever leave? I looked at Toast, laying by the fireplace, tail flicking in his sleep. I shook my head. He'll stay. Then I added, until everyone he's meant to find has been found. It was spring again. The trees bloomed with soft pinks. The wind carried the scent of new beginnings, and Liam was turning 8. He wanted a quiet celebration, just family, cake, and, of course, toast. That morning, Toast sat beside him during breakfast, head on Liam's lap, tail gently thumping. I remember thinking, this is what peace looks like. No balloons, no gifts, just presents. But something was different in Toast that day. He was slower to rise, his breathing heavier. He still followed Liam around the yard, still perked his ears when a bird chirped, but his eyes held a new kind of tired, a deep, ancient kind of knowing. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Toast came to my room. He sat beside the door. Didn't whine, didn't bark, just waited. I sat up. You want to go out? He looked at me. That look I'd come to know, the one that meant follow me. I grabbed my coat. No leash, just instinct. He walked ahead, slow, steady through the quiet town, across the park, down the path we hadn't taken in months. Into the woods. It wasn't like before. This time, he wasn't leading with urgency. He was retracing steps, like he was remembering, or saying goodbye. We reached the old clearing, the place we'd found Liam's shoe. Toast walked to the center, sat, then looked up at me. This is where it started, I whispered. He blinked slowly. I sat beside him, put my hand on his fur. The silence around us felt sacred. Then he laid his head on my lap, breathed deeply, and closed his eyes. I stayed with him for hours, listening to the wind, to the heartbeat of a forest that once held my son, and to the soft, steady rhythm of Toast's breath, until the first rays of dawn slipped through the trees, and he stood. One last time, we walked home together, slower than ever, each step a memory. That morning, Liam ran to him as usual. Toast, he giggled. Where did you go? Toast licked his cheek, then lay down at Liam's feet and didn't get up again. The vet said his heart was tired, that he was old, older than we realized, and that he had waited long enough, waited to finish what he came for, to see the mission through. Liam sat beside him all day, talked to him, read to him, and when night came, Toast rested his head on Liam's lap one last time. He looked at me, then at Liam, and then he let go. We buried him beneath the sycamore tree, the same one from the park where he first comforted a crying stranger. Liam made a stone marker. He wrote, Toast. He found me when no one else could. He stayed until I didn't need saving anymore. He left when he knew I could find others too. The world didn't stop when Toast left, but we did. For a while, we sat with the silence, with the empty space on the porch, the stillness of nights without pause on the floor, the ache that only a dog-shaped soul could leave behind. Then something happened. One day, Liam asked if we could go back to the woods. To remember him, he said. We went and sat by the clearing, and as we sat in the grass, a rustle came from the trees. A fox? A deer. No, a small shaggy dog, dirty, thin, looking lost. Liam stood slowly, held out his hand. The dog approached, timid, wary, then licked his fingers. I watched as Liam knelt beside it, whispered, It's okay, you're safe now. He turned to me, eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a while. Purpose. Mom, I think I want to help animals like Toast helped me. I smiled through tears, because I understood then, Toast hadn't just saved Liam, he had shaped him. That night, I opened my journal one last time. Wrote, he wasn't just the dog who found my son. He was the dog who reminded us how to live. He showed us what love looks like when it's quiet, what faith feels like when it has fur. He didn't come for forever. He came for as long as we needed. And when his mission was done, he left us better than he found us. The end.